The night before the largest military invasion in human history, a young American soldier from Ohio wrote a letter to his mother and tucked it inside his jacket, just in case. By sunrise, he would be sprinting through walls of machine gun fire on a beach he'd never heard of 6 months ago. His name was one of 2,501 Americans who would die that day. But what they did on June 6, 1944, changed the world forever. By 1944, Adolf Hitler had turned Europe into a prison. Nazi Germany controlled France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, an iron grip stretching from the Atlantic coast to deep inside the Soviet Union. Millions of Jewish people, resistance fighters, and civilians were being systematically murdered. The free world was bleeding out. America had entered the war after Pearl Harbor in 1941, and Allied forces had already fought brutal campaigns in North Africa and Italy. But everyone knew the real key to ending the war was getting back into Western Europe, storming the continent, and pushing Hitler's army all the way back to Berlin. The plan was called Operation Overlord. The target, a 50-mile stretch of heavily fortified beaches in Normandy, France. The Germans called their coastal defense system the Atlantic Wall, miles of concrete bunkers, land mines, steel obstacles, and thousands of machine guns pointed directly at the sea. Hitler's generals called it impenetrable. The Allies were about to prove them wrong. At 12:16 a.m. on June 6, American paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions jumped out of planes into pitch-black darkness over Normandy. Many were dropped miles off course. Some drowned in flooded fields. Others landed alone, behind enemy lines, completely surrounded. They fought anyway. On the ground, or rather, in the water, things were even more terrifying. At 6:30 a.m., the first landing crafts hit the beaches. The ramps dropped. And the Germans opened fire. On a beach codenamed Omaha, it became a slaughterhouse within seconds. Men from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions were cut down before they even reached the sand. The water turned red. Bodies piled up at the shoreline. Officers were killed instantly. Radios were destroyed. The plan fell apart in minutes. One survivor described it simply. The beach was absolute hell. But here's what the history books sometimes miss. The men didn't stop. With no orders, no cover, and no certainty they would live another 5 minutes, small groups of soldiers started moving. Sergeant William Stuyvesant. Captain John Finka. Private after private after private. They crawled through sand, they climbed cliffs with their bare hands, they threw themselves at machine gun nests so the men behind them could advance. At a place called Point du Hoc, Army Rangers scaled a 100-foot cliff under direct fire using rope ladders and grappling hooks. When they reached the top, they were met with grenades and bayonets. They took it anyway. By mid-morning, Omaha Beach looked like a lost cause. The casualties were catastrophic. Back on the command ships, some generals actually debated calling off the assault entirely. Then something incredible happened. The survivors, exhausted, bleeding, barely organized, started pushing inland. Not because someone ordered them to, but because they refused to let their fallen brothers die for nothing. Small units linked up. Naval destroyers moved so close to shore they nearly ran aground, firing their guns point-blank at German positions to give the soldiers cover. By the time darkness fell on June 6, 156,000 Allied troops had landed on 5 beaches across Normandy. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's supposedly invincible fortress, had been cracked wide open. D-Day didn't end the war overnight. The fighting in Normandy would rage for weeks. But the invasion broke something in the Nazi war machine that never healed. Within 11 months, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The beaches of Normandy became the beginning of the end for one of history's greatest evils. Concentration camps were liberated. Occupied nations were freed. And an entire continent slowly began to breathe again. Today, the American cemetery at Normandy holds 9,388 graves, rows upon rows of white crosses and stars of David, looking out over the same water those men crossed in darkness and fear. Those soldiers didn't have superhero powers. They were 19-year-old kids from Kansas, Georgia, and New York who were terrified, and did it anyway. The letter that Ohio soldier wrote to his mother? Millions of families received ones just like it. But because those men ran toward the fire instead of away from it, we never had to.